A chart recorder widget is something that might be very convenient for logging a telemetry variable or a Lua expression made from telemetry variables over the course of a flight. So looking at fuel consumption of a gas-powered or a turbine-powered airplane, looking at battery capacity of an electric airplane, looking at distance from the home point with a GPS, looking at altitude profiles of a flight. So a chart recorder is not really something you look at in a moment, like a gauge that gives you an instantaneous reading. It's more something that creates a record of the flight. So it's likely to be an instrument panel you'll build, but likely not be looking at until you're finished with the flight. So let's talk about how to set that up. So we put chart recorder here. We're on the emulator. We're on the website here now, and so we'll say new chart recorder. So what comes up here is a basic window. Now we have this one. The default chart recorder that gets created is the full screen, the 320 by 160. And of course, if we wanted to make a smaller one, we could. But typically, these make more sense large, so it's defaulting to the maximum size. We can set a minimum and maximum value for the scale. You can also edit that on the transmitter. And then you can set the background color to any color you like within the CSS colors, or it can be transparent. Chart background color is separate. You can set that again as you prefer, and the chart trace color. So now what we've done here is we've set this up kind of like the stacked gauges, where we want to have this mapping of one widget to one telemetry variable. So how are we going to handle multiple traces on a chart recorder? Because often you want to have 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 traces on a chart recorder. Well, if I tell this chart recorder that I want to have room for 4 traces, and that's the most it will do. I can click past that, but it won't do anything. If I just go to a maximum number of traces of 4, I'll be able to fill in extra traces. And you'll see, of course, this inevitably squashes the space we have. And by the way, the sine wave that we build there is just, since we don't have any real-time data on the computer, just to give you an idea of what the display would look like. Now, once we've got this set up kind of the way we want it, and by the way, we have different, 30 seconds, 1 minute, 2 minute, time spans on the full scale. Let's then show you how to do the stacking. So what we're going to do is we're going to duplicate this, and we're going to go down here and say this is trace number 2. And what you see here in the window is that when we do traces above number 1, all it's adding is the trace and the little legend up at the top and the bar graph. So we're going to call this trace 2. We'll call this one trace 1. We'll do the trace color here to be green. Okay, that's kind of a lousy choice. Let's go with orange. All right, so trace 2, and then we can say, okay, let's duplicate that again and go down here and set that one to purple, and we'll tell it that that's trace 3. And so you can see as we're adding traces, we're just taking that sine wave that it makes up, and the web app is just shifting it over by 45 degrees every time you click a new one. And then, of course, we can do one more and duplicate, and we can go down here and say that let that be trace number 4, and we'll put that one in yellow. Okay, so that's how we get all 4 traces on the chart recorder. When I bring this down to the computer, it's going to make 4 widgets, just as we see over here as we finish up all of our edits here on the right-hand side. You can see we actually have 4 separate widgets. We have trace number 1's widget, which contains all the background and the time labels, trace number 2, 3, and 4. And so each of these you can associate with a different telemetry variable. Now, one thing that we've been thinking about, what to do about, not quite sure what to do about yet, is it really only makes sense if all of these have the same time scale on the bottom. And if we set the first one up the way we want it, and then we duplicate the other 3 from it, they're going to have the same time base. But of course, I can change this is not going to prohibit us from changing the time base of 2 or 3 or 4, or having these time bases disagree. So right now we do have a warning on the transmitter. If you edit the time base with the panels editor on the transmitter, it's going to tell you, please make sure that the time bases all have the same value. Right. So that's how we set up the chart recorder. That's how we do up to 4 traces. Now we've done some measurements on the CPU capacity that's consumed by this, and it's consuming quite a lot of CPU to do 4. But 4 seemed like about the most you could reasonably fit on the screen, and then beyond that, probably you should do a second instrument panel with another chart with 1, 2, 3, or 4 additional ones. And of course, the CPU is only used up when this widget is on the screen of the transmitter. The amount of CPU capacity used just to take the data, because of course the data is captured all the time, whether this chart is on the screen or not. It's captured continuously, even if you're not looking at it. That's really a very small amount of CPU. So no problem having a bunch of these. You're only going to be able to look at one at a time, and again, you're likely to be looking at that as a record. We put these bar graphs over on the right just so you have some sense of what this thing is doing, as it is in the moment, whereas these traces give you a longer term view.